Okay, just a quick look at these passages from Chloe Hooper's The Tall Man to have a look at some of the language features. She starts here, why would a police officer choose to work solely in these communities? So what appears to be an open-ended question is actually followed by a lot of speculation. And this speculation goes right throughout her observations of Chris Hurley. One could say that it's because she doesn't get to interview him directly, but then again, as we will look through these passages, we'll see some bias that she presents. So a question such as this will open the reader's mind to the possibilities, and then she tends to lead the witness, so to speak, by presenting some of the possibilities as she sees it. Of course, being a journalist, she tries to interview as many people as possible, and the people that we know associated with Hurley that she speaks to sometimes are unnamed, like this acquaintance of Hurley. So even though this does seem to be a secondary source of information that could give some of Hurley's attributes and some insight, it is unnamed and again could be quite speculative. Have a look at the wording of calculated and tallied. So these sound a lot like pejorative terms. So if we go back to having a look at what pejorative is. Okay, so pejorative is expressing contempt and disapproval, but sometimes pejorative terms aren't really direct attacks. For example, the word youth could be a great word. Oh, so youthful, Or it could be like, oh, these youths that are misbehaving, it could be used as a pejorative term, something that's a bit sort of insulting. So while she doesn't put these straight out attacks on Chris Hurley, the way we use some words like calculated or tallied seem to have negative connotations or pejorative connotations that make us think that perhaps these are not good qualities to have. The same applies for ambition, because it seems like this person who has these qualities is quite a schemer. Notice we've got the fastest way up the ladder. This is a bit of a cliche, but it has implications also that the fastest way is not always the safest, which of course has implications that people can be hurt in the process. And this might be the case for Dumaji. So we next look at this notion of these places can be addictive. So if we have a look at this, addiction again, not a good thing. And we talked last lesson about Fight Club, how in Fight Club these guys like to get in fights with each other, beat each other up because it made them feel alive. And this is the sort of feeling that we have mentioned down here, more vivid, more intense, So it seems like violence for some of these police officers is sort of like a drug, something that they cannot help. Again, all these comments are very much positioning the reader to make certain assumptions about Hurley. Now, there are a lot of intertextual references throughout Hooper's writing, and these also cause us to characterize Hurley in a particular way. So here, referring to Mr. Kurtz and Heart of Darkness, we obviously get an image of somebody in particular. Let's have a look. Heart of Darkness. Okay, somebody who found himself to be a bit of a king in the jungles of the third world. And we can see by these images, we kind of find him to be a rather confronting looking character. Now, in the next passage, which I'll flick forward to for a second, she talks about Dirty Harry. So Dirty Harry is sort of where have I got a link back here, 1971 film. Okay, so he was a cop as well, Dirty Harry, but when the legal system didn't do what he wanted it to do, he took the law into his own hands, and he was pretty tough. This is one of his sort of quotes, I won't even do it in his voice, but you've got to ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? So he was quite a tough guy. Running around, guns blaring, questions asked later sort of thing. So here we're starting to get a lot of images of these characters and associating these characters with Chris Hurley, a renegade cop, a guy who is kind of a king in an underworld and those sorts of things. So Notice when she says here, he says, "I was like the king of the island," the inspector recalled. "I suggested that this was temptation some officers succumbed to. The community became their fiefdom, or fiefdom." "No," he said, "perhaps misunderstanding my meaning. It was just that it was my place." So we can see by his response there, and by her including that quote, it makes this guy sound a bit silly because he does misinterpret his question, but it is fairly evident that he is treating the the region as being his, like his kingdom. We talked about the list of questions in here. What I didn't ask: can you step into the dysfunction and desperation and not be corrupted in some way? In a community of extreme violence, are you too forced to be violent? So again, she didn't actually ask these questions. So by having a list of questions, and they're very much loaded questions, here at the end of this section, the readers are left thinking the same thing as Chloe Hooper, even though they're unsubstantiated. So we have these references throughout the next passages of, the law enforcers becoming the law themselves, and this relates to Dirty Harry because he went around touting his gun as if he was the law, taking the law into his own hands. Now, also we have an anecdote here that's kind of rather damning when this older woman was told she needed to sit on Hurley's lap, and he told her she had to do it because he was in charge of police and she'd have to do what he said. So this has a lot of overtones of sort of sexual abuse, and positions us again to view Hurley rather negatively. This particular Indigenous fellow, Mirandu Yana, saying he was a thug and a mug, I'm the same, and we've got this constant reference of touch-up. There's touch-up here, there's touch-up over here, where she puts it in inverted commas, and inverted commas might also imply that it's more than a touch-up, and there's touch-up down here. So there's constant reference to this notion of having to use violence to set somebody straight, and a lot of anecdotal evidence as well. So this is really setting the context for perhaps the violence that occurred in the prison. We have again a reference to the difficulties of a legal system based on white patriarchy. You've got no chance in the legal system, a white jury in Mount Isa, this and that. So they're talking about, again, the very Dirty Harry-esque situation where in Dirty Harry they weren't able to get a conviction on a criminal because of technicalities. Where was it? It was in here, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he was released based on technicalities. So it was shown in Dirty Harry that the legal system was unreliable. It's shown here, they talk about it's unreliable because it takes so long. So sometimes, taking justice into your own hands was quicker or more effective in their minds. But here, another ineffectiveness of the legal system is signposted as being the fact that it's based on a white patriarchy. So she has the word alleged down here, which suggests that, she's trying to be journalistic with this story of this fellow who'd been beaten by Hurley and not taking it as fact. But then again, even though sometimes she tries to assert a journalistic style, the rest of the text, and we've already seen, has so many hints at personal prejudices and judgments towards Hurley that we can't really take some of the journalistic language seriously. And again, touch up and touch up. So let's have a look at passage number 3. So notice the difference in sentence structure in the first section and the second section. In the first section, we have lots of really short sentences. It was Friday afternoon. He had done well. So that makes it seem really emotionally detached when she's talking about Hurley and finishing the case. We then contrast this to the more complex sentences in the second part. The top button of her collar was undone and she had a series of pink plastic pads on her chest. Her heart was being monitored. So that's a more complex sentence. So it seems that there's more empathy and interest in detailing Cameron's family as opposed to how she details Hurley. Also, without mentioning the tall man myth or legend, we've got things like evasive spirit and pin him down, cut him to size. So the tall man is a spirit and also tall. So again, we're creating the parallel of the tall man throughout this passage. Now, when she says, I looked around for Cameron's family but couldn't see them, we obviously see her personal concern there. And she's quite descriptive of how they're looking, top button of the collar undone, plastic pads on her chest, her heart was being monitored. So this evokes a strong sense of empathy, well, it intends to evoke a strong sense of empathy, because it looks like the case is almost killing Elizabeth. We also have a look at the contrast here between the jungle of metre-high weeds, and then later on it mentions Elizabeth pointing out lilies and roses with full perfect petals in this magazine, and yet her plant cuttings had not taken. So this again gives us that sense of disappointment that the Indigenous people are hoping for a better future, a future of lilies and roses with full perfect petals, but it's just not taking on. The buds of their equality and freedom are not growing. So really, while it seems like she's describing the garden, it's actually a metaphor for the Indigenous condition. Finishing the paragraph with all the foster children had been taken away from her, again echoes this tradition sort of stolen children, although she does touch on perhaps a rather damning incident that could justify the children being taken. When we have a look at the last one, the last segment is actually a little bit confusing even for me. I had the impression of her spinning. When we first met, she had a great stillness, a poise, which I knew was a front, but such a strong front for someone made of something quick, hot, of so high voltage. Now they had taken what she loved, the children. But why raise them to die so young? It's a very odd question, that one. It's really sort of paradoxical. I think she means... maybe why raise the children to have them die on the inside so young? I'm not sure, but it can relate back to her plant imagery as well. I wondered if these were her thoughts too, not just mine. So again, she tends to make these little comments and often finish sections with her own thoughts that imply that she is on the side of Cameron's family. So the idea here is to analyse these three passages, but unite some of this close analysis detail with the further issues of, white patriarchy, Indigenous inequality, lack of justice, and so forth.